This session is about Microsoft Teams and Exchange, and especially, what is Exchange Hybrid, why you need it, and how you're going to implement it, especially with the focus on Microsoft Teams. Just a little introduction from to me. So I'm an MVP, but I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, regional lead for Germany, and a certified master focusing on messaging solutions. And you can find me on the internet, and I'd like to see you as a follower. And I do have blog posts and other stuff. And I'm an author on 2 German-speaking books about Microsoft 365 Premium and Exchange Server 2019. So what are you going to learn in this session? First, we will start with what is Exchange Hybrid, and why you need Exchange Hybrid. The implementation is based on some screenshots, not a demo, just to make it fail-safe for an online demonstration, and the challenges that we are facing when we want to connect Microsoft Teams to on-premises mailboxes. Afterwards, if you download the presentation, you'll find the links to additional resources at the very end of the presentation. So, well, there are some Exchange consultants that say that implementing Exchange Hybrid, as always, it depends situation, because it depends highly on your on-premises environment, and yeah, if it's easy or it's not, you will see. So what is Exchange Hybrid? You can think of Exchange Hybrid as some sort of a trust relationship between 2 different organizations. Think of your on-premises Exchange organization as the one entity and the Exchange Online as the other. And you want to act those 2, which reside in 2 different environments, act as one. So that's why we need an Exchange Hybrid to establish this organizational trust relationship between the 2. Email itself, and especially Exchange, relies first on the exchange of SMTP messages, so just classic emails, and we rely on something called hybrid functionality, which is based on the HTTPS protocol. So both environments, Exchange Online and Exchange on-premises, must be able to communicate with the other on both of the 2 protocols. This is where the fun comes into play when it comes to Exchange Hybrid. The trust relationship is established using the hybrid configuration wizard, which activates the hybrid configuration settings in the on-premises organization and in Exchange Online. Luckily, we do have different modes of operation, but we'll talk about this in a few minutes. The hybrid mode itself comes in 2 variants and in 3 different modes of operation. First, we have something that is called the classic mode. So the classic hybrid mode is something that we utilize since the early days of the Exchange Online service. And the classic mode comes in 3 different flavors. And I think that most of you will be familiar with the so-called classic full hybrid implementation. This is the one that historically we use since the early days. We will see the details of this configuration in a moment, because it's really very important to understand the difference between classic and the modern hybrid configuration and the hybrid modes of operation that we have available. As you can see, we do have a full modern hybrid configuration available and a minimal. So what's the difference between classic and modern? In the very beginning, we do need the Azure AD Connect synchronization from the on-premises environment to the Azure AD to synchronize all the required information of end user information and mailboxes located in the on-premises environment. This is one of the very important steps you have to think about, that you enable the Azure hybrid option in Azure AD Connect. Without this option, Azure AD and Exchange Online will never ever know that a synchronized user already has an on-premises mailbox. If you do not enable the Exchange hybrid option and you assign an Exchange Online license, the user will get a second mailbox, a so-called cloud-only mailbox. And if this happens, we are in real trouble because a single user does have two different mailboxes. For Mailflow, it is required to connect the on-premises Exchange organization and Exchange directly. So you have to establish an exchange-to-exchange communication. Normally, you would try to avoid a direct communication overspanning the perimeter network. That's where the edge transport role comes into play. The edge transport role is around since Exchange 2007, but it was never, it never received much love. It's a stepchild of Exchange, so to speak. But it's the easiest way to get SMTP communication, hybrid SMTP communication between the two organizations up and running. Alternatively, if you do want to avoid establishing an edge transport server, you can overspan the perimeter network and establish a direct connection between the internal hub transport service and Exchange Online. It is recommended that you use a dedicated external IP address, a dedicated host name for this communication. So a SMTP communication that does not rely on your classic MX records and the direct communication that is used to the internet, which requires an additional public IP address, additional public TLS certificate, and a dedicated host name. Client access, as mentioned, Exchange Online must be able to communicate with your internal mail servers. We publish the internal Exchange servers using a reverse proxy, as we've done in the past. So this is a classic way how you publish your internal Exchange organization for client access using HTTPS to the internet, which again requires a certificate and a public IP address. At the same time, all internal Exchange servers must be able to connect and communicate with Exchange Online. So this is just think about querying FreeBSD information for mailboxes that are already migrated to the cloud. So the HTTP traffic is for hybrid functionality between the two organizations. It is supported to use outbound proxy servers, which can or must be then configured on a per Exchange server basis. So use the set Exchange server commandlet to configure any outbound proxy. So where's the main difference between the classic full hybrid and the modern full hybrid? Again, we need to have Azure AD Connect synchronization in place and Exchange hybrid enabled. This is the same requirement for the as for the classic full hybrid. There's not much change or not much difference in regards to the Mailflow, because Mailflow is for modern and classic hybrid just the same. You can either connect directly the two Exchange organizations or use an edge transport server, just the same requirements. The main difference is when we talk about how client access works, so how Exchange Online communicates with the on-premises Exchange organization. Modern hybrid installs something called the Exchange Hybrid Agent. That's a little Windows service that is installed on the server you run the hybrid configuration with it on. And this service establishes an outbound connection to the Azure Service Bus. And this outbound connection, so from your internal servers to Microsoft 365, is used by Exchange Online to communicate with your internal Exchange server organization. So no public IP address, no TLS certificate, no external host name required for the hybrid service communication between Exchange Online and the on-premises environment. This is the main difference between modern hybrid, or modern full hybrid, and the classic hybrid model. Still, the internal Exchange servers must be able to communicate with Exchange Online for hybrid functionality. So as you see, there's only one hybrid agent installed on a single server, which is sort of a single point of failure. How can you enhance the availability for the service? This is pretty simple. You just install additional instances of the hybrid agent on additional servers that then establish an outbound connectivity to the Azure Service Bus, and you're good to go. So as long as you do not update or reboot all the servers having a hybrid agent running at the same time. So this means that when you talk about Exchange Hybrid, the full classic is for a permanent hybrid operation. And this is the configuration model that is required when you want to use Microsoft Teams with on-premises mailboxes. At this point in time, so it is the only hybrid model that supports on-premises mailboxes and calendar access with Microsoft Teams. All the other models, like a minimal, classic minimal, is for a temporary hybrid operation, which runs for just a few weeks or months. But your goal for minimal hybrid is to migrate all on-premises mailboxes to Microsoft 365. The same is true for the Classic Express. Classic Express goes even further because it's a temporary hybrid operation model for just a few days or weeks, so that it is supposed to be used when you want to migrate a small Exchange organization to Exchange Online. And it's even the hybrid configuration wizard installed the Azure ID and configures it using the Express in the Express mode, which synchronizes the full Azure Active Directory to Azure ID, which is something that normally an enterprise is not interested in. In comparison, the modern full hybrid is for the permanent hybrid operation as well, but this operation model does not work with Teams access to on-premises mailboxes. You're good to go to use the full modern hybrid model if you do want to just establish a hybrid mode of operation for your Exchange organization and you're not interested in a Teams using on-premises mailboxes. Modern does have a second mode available, which is Modern Minimal, which again is for migrating all of your on-premises mailboxes to the cloud. So it's just for a temporary hybrid operation. Why would you ever need Exchange Hybrid? Well, coexistence between on-premises and Exchange Online, mailbox migration to and from. Normally, nobody really talks about the fact that you cannot only move mailboxes from your on-premises organization to the cloud, but even from Exchange Online back to your Exchange organization. So it's not only an onboarding process supported, but offboarding as well. Yeah, and you need it for Microsoft Teams access to on-premises mailboxes, in this case for calendar access, and for full transition from your on-prem organization to Exchange Online, and especially for an optimal migration experience, because moving mailboxes from your on-prem org to Exchange Online is transparent for end users. So there's no reason for recreating Outlook profiles as an example. Besides Teams, there might be an additional requirement to establish a hybrid configuration, especially centralized mail flow. Centralized mail flow is something where all on Exchange Online mail flow originating to internet recipients is routed to your internal or on-premises Exchange organization first, and then flows via a on-premises gateway to external recipients. Such a mail flow approach would be an example for such a mailflow requirement would be gateway-based SMIME encryption, decryption for emails, applying disclaimers via a centralized software solution on-prem, archiving, journaling, and anything else you can think of. Another requirement is, which is gets even more obvious these days when the Exchange Online team deactivates older TLS protocols. If you have on-premises server systems or hardware components that have a requirement to send emails, but are not capable of establishing TLS 1.0 or 1.1 TLS connections, you might want to offer a on-premises SMTP relay. So why not use your very last Exchange server just for that? So it's not about the protocols only, because this then it can even support applications and devices with requirement to sending emails that do not support SMTP user authentication or the upcoming or now available SMTP open authentication, modern authentication approach. So just, to buy your time to run and operate your legacy applications even longer. So what are the recommendations when you go, you want to establish a hybrid? First of all, you should use Exchange Server 2019 as a hybrid endpoint. This is, I think you might have seen the announcement during Ignite by the Exchange team that there will be an Exchange V next version in the second half of 2021. And Exchange Server 2019 is the supported version for an in-place upgrade. Any older version of Exchange, let's say 2013, 2016, which later this month will move from mainstream support into extended support, will not be capable of an in-place upgrade. So you would need to set up Exchange Server V Next in parallel and then perform a classic Exchange transition. Microsoft Teams uses the Microsoft Teams backend services. So the backend services are the Teams components that run Microsoft Teams in the cloud. So not the client, but the backend services. They try to connect to your on-premises endpoint using something called Autodiscover version 2. Autodiscover version 2 does not support Autodiscover redirects currently, but more to this about this later. The client access endpoints must be accessible for the Microsoft backend services. So even that we call it client access endpoint, it's not that the Teams client is going to access your on-prem mailbox. It is the client backend services that access your on-prem mailbox for you, because the clients connect to the backend services. Run always the latest supported cumulative update, and always use proper third-party certificates. With Teams access to on-prem mailboxes and Autodiscover, it's a little tricky because it is required that you create a dedicated HTTPS point for any of your used SMTP domains that are used to Autodiscover the on-prem mailboxes, which can be tricky if you are an organization that has a lot of accepted domains and use those accepted domains as primary SMTP address domains. And add all required names of your configured Exchange namespace. You might face a challenge that the subject alternate name list for a certificate is getting long, and a long subject alternative name list is pretty expensive for such a certificate. So you might challenge the use of SMTP domains. And again, when using centralized mailflow, I recommend that you use a dedicated TLS certificate for the connection between on-prem and Exchange Online. Reason is that Exchange Online must be able to differentiate between incoming traffic using the trusted hybrid mailflow connection and any internet-related mailflow that your gateway might send to other Office 365 tenants. And because this traffic ends up in Exchange Online Protection as well, and the service must be able to differentiate. And the easiest and properly working way to differentiate incoming connection is using the TLS certificate. If you rely on securing those connections with your remote IP addresses, you might face, let's say, I call it phenomenons, but this is out of the scope for this talk. And you must enable open authentication for the client access endpoints. The Exchange team does have a wonderful and a very detailed blog post about this. The link to the blog post is on the resources slides in the very end of this deck. Yeah, and you don't only have to have the auto-discover endpoints in the certificate. As you can think, it's required that you have all the auto-discover entries in your external DNS zones for all of the SMTP domains used as primary mailboxes. When you want to implement Exchange Hybrid, you must familiarize yourself with the available options for implementing hybrid and be sure you know the mode of operation for your Exchange Hybrid configuration. So you must ensure that you familiarize yourself with all the demands and requirements of your organization to make the proper decision. Before running the hybrid configuration visit, ensure that your on-prem environment is ready for implementing a hybrid configuration, which means that you install all the latest cumulative updates, have all your additional public IP addresses in place, DNS hostname set up, have verified the configuration using the remote connectivity analyzer, have set up all your additional Edge transport servers with the certificates, Edge Sync is in place, and when using Edge transport servers, it is very important that the transport certificate used by the Edge transport servers is imported in the certificate store of at least one of your internal servers. But that's it. Just import the TLS certificate. Do never ever enable the imported certificate for any of the Exchange services. Reason is that the hybrid configuration wizard must be able to select that certificate for configuration purposes, for hybrid configuration purposes, to be precise. And it should never ever be used by any of the on-prem Exchange services. And before running the hybrid configuration wizard, ensure that Azure ID Connect is up and running with the Exchange Hybrid option in place. This is just a quick run through, pretty quick run through. You can have a watch, watch the more detail when you download the slide deck. But I want to let you know that the hybrid configuration wizard itself is a so-called click to run application available using this AKAMS link. And you might face the challenge that the application won't download or the setup won't start. Reason being is that you must ensure that on the system where you run the hybrid configuration wizard, the .application file type is properly mapped to Internet Explorer. Otherwise, the click to run manifest won't be interpreted correctly. And each time you start the hybrid configuration wizard, the software itself verifies if there is a new version available and downloads the new version and then starts the hybrid configuration wizard. The current version is version 17 something. If you encounter or when you see the version 16 on one of your servers because you've downloaded the HCW in the past, please uninstall version 16 manually and install version 17 after uninstalling version 16. There is no upgrade process from 16 to 17. So quick run through. You must ensure that the HCW can connect to an internal exchange server for configuration purposes. This is the configuration endpoint. If for any reason the hybrid configuration wizard, or you cannot complete the hybrid configuration wizard, this is not much of an issue. Just add the wizard, fix the issue, and run the HCW again. You can run the HCW as often as you like. You can select the optimal server, a manual server. You have to select the, oops, sorry for that one. The target infrastructure, normally this is Office 365 worldwide. This is in general the worldwide service. You provide the credentials required to connect to the on-prem environment and to Exchange Online. Adjust the credentials as needed because the HCW tries to establish the connection using the currently logged on user running the HCW. If this account does not have the proper permission, you can change those during the in this step. When you connect to both environments, the HCW tries to gather proper the information if there is already a hybrid configuration in place. And this is the step where you verify just by running the HCW if your internal, your on-premises infrastructure is properly configured. Because one of the issues that I see often is that the Windows Remote Management Service is configured using group policies. And if a administrator not familiar with the requirements for the hybrid configuration wizard, maybe basic authentication was turned off. In this case, the gathering of the configuration information will fail. So with this run through, if you can successfully gather the information for both environments, you're pretty in good shape that even the configuration will then work as expected. But this is one of the issues that I've seen very often. Then you have to make a decision if you want to go minimal hybrid or full hybrid. Be careful here because minimal hybrid is the default, the recommended selection in the wizard, because the wizard tries to migrate all of your on-prem mailboxes to Exchange Online. This is why the minimal hybrid configuration is pre-selected. So in this case, we move to the full hybrid configuration. The other option available is the option to migrate your parts of your on-prem configuration to Exchange Online, like organization configuration, policy objects provided here, brings you to the documentation of the organizational objects that are currently supported for this transfer. This varies depending on the Exchange version you have currently on-prem in production. When we select full hybrid, then we make the decision if we want to implement classic hybrid or modern hybrid. In this case, because we want to connect teams to on-prem, select classic hybrid. If for any reason you already have a hybrid configuration in place, but selected modern hybrid in the past, don't worry about it because this is noticed by the hybrid configuration wizard, and the wizard uninstalls the hybrid agent and reconfigures it to use classic hybrid. You must provide a service account for on-prem connectivity. When using modern hybrid, by the agent, the hybrid agent to connect to the web services endpoint. If you use classic, this account is used by the endpoint configuration Exchange Online to connect to the Exchange web services endpoint for migrating mailboxes. please always use a dedicated service account with the proper RBAC permissions in the on-prem organization. Do never ever use some sort of a administrator account like I did to create this screenshot. The second step, the next step is to select if you want your internal servers or edge transport servers for mail flow. If you want to set up centralized mail flow, remember that centralized mail flow is that any internet-bound traffic from cloud mailboxes will be routed to your on-prem organization and then via a gateway to the final recipients. You have to click Advanced and then click Enable Centralized Mail Transport. So this option is slightly hidden. Remember to do this any time you run the hybrid configuration wizard, because if you run it a second time, it remains in this state and the option is disabled. You must enable it each and every time you run the hybrid configuration wizard. Next step is to select the service for the receive connector configuration. As you can see, either internal service or edge. After that, you have to select the service responsible for sending emails. The edge transport server is not listed in this case because the send connector for edge service is then synchronized using edge sync. So you do not have to select the edge servers separately when setting up the send connectors. And this is a step where we select the TLS certificate from a server, a selected internal server for the edge transport connectivity. Reason is that the HCW uses the thumbprint information and the common name information of the certificate and configures the inbound connector in Exchange Online to match that certificate, just to secure the communication between the two organizations. Okay, that's already said. And we need to provide information on what is the external name where Exchange Online should connect to when establishing inbound SMTP connections to your organization. This name definitely should match the certificate name used for the email transport. I'd recommend using edge transport servers because it makes transport more secure. That's it for the hybrid. So you click update and wait. Normally, everything runs pretty smoothly. If it fails, you find the HCW log files in the app directory. The HCW is an application that runs in the user context. So the log files are in the app data folder of the logged on user. And the log file contains all the steps, not only as text, but all PowerShell commandlets you can are in the log file as well, and any exception that the PowerShell commandlets have thrown. So it's pretty easy to identify the error. And again, use remote connectivity analyzer to check and verify inbound connectivity. It might be tricky if your firewall team already restricted access for inbound connectivity to the IP address ranges for Exchange Online. In this case, go to the remote connectivity analyzer page, and in the lower right corner, you'll find version information. In the version information README, there is a section where you find the IP addresses used by the remote connectivity analyzer and have those IP addresses then added to the inbound firewall policy. And this enables you to use the RCA to test inbound connectivity. And again, firewall proxies, name resolution, just the classic stuff to analyze issues with inbound connectivity. And again, the Windows Remote Management Service requires basic authentication. So what about Teams? any mailbox that you migrate to, or any user that is synchronized and for Teams enabled and has an on-premises mailbox, requires that the SMT address of the primary address for that user is resolvable using autodiscover. So for fabricam.com, the Teams backend service tries to find autodiscover.fabricam.com, and it does not support a redirect. So if the user, if the autodiscover.fabricam.com redirects to autodiscover.contoso.com, this is going to fail. The autodiscover v2 implementation of Teams require that there is a dedicated endpoint using a TLS certificate for autodiscover.fabricam.com. You might use an open source solution like an edge router, which is something like Traffic. The link is in the resources slide as well, which allows to set up an endpoint for multiple names using, for example, Let's Encrypt certificates, and then perform a redirect to a single endpoint, which then represents the Exchange endpoint. But this is a totally different thing to explain. But I have implemented the Traffic tool with some customers that have quite a lot of SMTP domains. Calendar access in Microsoft Teams is supported if your Teams operation mode is Island, Teams only, or Skype for Business with Teams collaboration and meeting. These are the three coax modes that are support on-premises mailboxes. If you have any other coexistence mode currently in use and wonder why the calendar is not showing up for users, verify your coexistence mode with Teams. A simple one, verify the app, Teams app policy. Maybe the calendar app is just plain not available for some users. And again, the Exchange hybrid option in Azure ID Connect as one is an issue which I've seen quite often with customers. Ensure that Azure AD and Exchange Online have the proper information available for on-prem mailboxes. So don't forget about the thing that Exchange Server 2010 is out of support on October 13th. So just next week. So it's the final end for Exchange Server 2010. 2016 is end of mainstream support. It's the same date. Keep this in mind when planning your on-prem Exchange infrastructure. Maybe it's simpler to migrate to all your mailboxes to Exchange Online. So that's it, mostly on the point. Please rate the session. Thank you for attending this sessions, and then I'll talk to Magnus if there are any questions.
Thank you, Thomas. No, we do currently not have any questions in the chat, but we still have a few minutes to go. So if there are any questions, please post them in the chat or just raise your hand and I will make sure to unmute you.
Thanks. Whoever LA is. Thank you. It was quite a run through, you know, this is a very complex topic. But thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the other sessions of the Teamfest. And if you do want to know what Teams is going to store and how it handles the mailbox, I recommend the recording from Tony Redmond session earlier this day. Thank you. So I shall stop sharing.
Yeah, I can just share the agenda for the next hour.
Perfect.
So I guess if anyone has any question, they will maybe see you in the speaker or in the lounge after the session, Thomas. Is that right? Or
yeah, I will definitely be in the lounge in half an hour, I'd say.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.